Welcome back to the Why Mindset Matters podcast. I'm Eslana Longer. I am a speaker, author, resilience mindset coach, a nurse, a midwife, and a mother of four. If this is somehow the first episode of mine that you've found, I want to provide a trigger warning. I do speak about suicide and the loss of my teenage daughter, Riley. Today we're diving into something that I wish that I had learned earlier, and that's the difference between who I am and the hats I wear in life, or the roles that I take on. Because let me tell you, if you mistake your role for your identity, then you'll wake up one day realizing that you've disappeared inside your own life, and it's a fast track to martyrdom. And it doesn't have to be that way. And in this episode, we're going to talk about how we can peel back those layers and how to recognize when you've surrendered to your story and how you can reclaim it, and just living with that call of the main character energy, if you like. So I know we can all relate to the many hats that we wear in life, or the roles that we take on. And for instance, if you're a friend or a sister or a brother, a daughter, a partner, a mother, father, nurse, entrepreneur, whatever it is, these are many of the hats that I will wear. Some of them across the lifespan, some of them only temporarily, some that I will, depending on my career, for instance, some you'll take on and off throughout the term of your career. Some will need to change shape and form, some that you don't take off, that you will wear across the lifespan. For instance, as a mother or a father, those are things that we will be and roles that we'll fill across the lifespan. I truly believe we still live in a world that doesn't actually encourage or do well to honour main character energy, which is quite unfortunate, because this is how one red hot crack at life, and we should be running toward our dreams like our souls on fire, as far as I'm concerned, but most of us don't do that. And I believe it's because, without realising it, we actually surrender to the following. We let the many hats that we're meant to wear across the lifespan seep into or be misconstrued, if you like, as our identity, as who I am. For instance, my professional role as a nurse or a midwife, even author, are all just hats that I wear. Some for longer than others, and some that will change shape and form over time, but hats are all the same, and that's not who I am. And the same goes for parenting. This is a tough one, because a lot of the time we think that's who we are. You know, I am their mum, and we let it kind of become a part of our identity in a way that it shouldn't. Being a mother or a father is a role that we fulfill, and one of the many hats that we wear, and yes, across the lifespan, but also one that's required to change shape and form. As they grow, so do the boundaries and expectations of my role. For instance, my role for a baby or a toddler obviously differs greatly to the needs and expectations and boundaries of my role for then parenting a teenager, or when my child gets to early adulthood and possibly even becomes parents themselves. You never stop being their parent. It's just that the hat that you wear needs to change shape and form to facilitate you being able to fulfill that role in a way where you're meeting and not overstepping the boundaries and expectations, and that you can continue to be fulfilled by that role. But if we let ourselves be defined as parent, as their mother or as their father, if we let that become our identity, then the real tragedy is that we facilitate our own suffering when they no longer need the same things from us that have become so enmeshed in our self-image and in our self-worth and how I see myself. So it's why so many people, I believe, suffer empty nest syndrome. It's a negative experience that's imposed by the perceived loss of a child, or loss of control, or loss of who we know ourselves to be come the inevitable time that they want or need to leave home. And it's actually the very opposite of main character energy, living in that way. But the reality is, if I've done my job well, and my child's ability to leave the nest confident in their capacity to navigate life, but at the same time still aware that they have me in their corner, is evidence that I've succeeded. I've fulfilled that part of my role in the lead up to this as a loving guide and mentor and protector that it means to be their parent. And if I want to avoid collapsing into an identity built solely around roles, and instead embody this main character energy that I'm going to talk about in a way that feels aligned and grounded and powerful, I need to make a conscious shift from attachment to my role towards connection with self. I went through the grief associated with letting myself be defined by my role when the kids were little. So we had always wanted 6 kids, and we got to 4, and the reality of it here is that the better you do for yourself, the harder they make it to do well and have more children, for instance. So with 4 children, we made the decision to stop, and it wasn't because we wanted to stop, it was because we couldn't afford to keep having children. And I had, obviously wanting 6 children, thought that I was going to have more babies and more small little people around me for a longer period. So when we stopped having kids and I was heading through this doorway that would transition me into the parent of now older children, because there wasn't going to be any more babies, I was faced this real sense of grief, and it was a lot. It was just interesting to find that it was so overwhelming, and I had to do a bit of a deep dive on what's going on for me. Why is this impacting me so significantly? And when I peeled back the layers, I found that I had let my identity become being the mother of small children. And it sounds weird now because, of course, you're never going to stay the mother of small children. They're inevitably, even if we'd had 6, going to grow up, and they won't be any more small children until we become grandparents. But either way, I had let myself be defined by my role as their mother. And because that role was changing shape and form into something uncharted and unfamiliar, it left me in this sea of just a sense of loss of self. I didn't know who I was without that definition and outline. And it's a really confronting deep dive to do, because what I had to do was acknowledge my emotions, validate them, allow them to be, but then work out how to move on from here. So really go through the grieving process with regards to letting go of how I thought my life was going to look and move forward with what was actually happening. And what happened was, when you peel it all back and you're left with the reality that because my whole sense of self, my self-worth and my identity was tied to roles and hats that I wear, I didn't know who I was without them. And growing up in an environment where we had a severely disabled sibling, the rest of the children kind of got shoved to the side. And I don't judge my parents for it. My sister, she was high needs, and everything became, though, will we go there will be determined by can she go there. When we'll get there will be determined by when she's ready. And because the needs were so significant, the other children being pushed to the side, we were not raised in the typical environment that fostered self-exploration. We were never asked, what do you think? What do you like? What do you hope or dream or whatever? It wasn't this healthy sense of self-exploration. And so I grew into a teen and then adult who didn't know how to answer those questions. I didn't know what I liked, or how could I? I didn't know who I was. I had no sense of self. And so I let my identity become defined by the roles in my life. I became the caregiver and the caretaker, and I became the nurse, and I became the mother and the wife. And that fed a sense of self enough that I went, okay, I'll do this, and then I'll be loved, and I'll be worthy, and I'll be all of these things that I should have had coming from myself, and a healthy sense of self I was looking for outside of myself. And I was looking for validation via my roles without realizing that's what I was doing. So when you strip these roles back, what I was left with was this very confronting awareness that I don't know who I am. And when you get to that place, when you really strip everything bare and you're left looking in the mirror and you can't even define the edges of yourself and your soul, and you have no idea where you're going in life, because how can you if you don't know who you are? It would have been more comfortable to go, I'm not doing this, and put the mask back over my face and just slip back into the roles and let that define how I was going to interact in my life and how I was going to show up and who I was inevitably going to be, which is really a submissive participant of my own life, living in martyrdom to everybody else's existence. And I promise you it's not going to lend itself to much other than resentment and burnout. And so I did the work. I really did, and worked on working out who I am. And it meant kind of dating myself, trying to get to know, going on exploratory kind of adventures of whatever it was, my likes and dislikes and things that obviously an adventure of self-discovery that was still safe within the confines of my life, that didn't jeopardize my capacity or ability to still fulfill the expectations and obligations that came with my roles. And you can be a dedicated parent and still go and explore your sense of self in the ways that are healthy and safe to do so, because I'm talking about, I didn't know where I would like to go for dinner. I didn't know what my likes and dislikes were. I just kind of passively went along with life and let my journey be guided by the wants, needs and desires of those around me. So it was something that I'm grateful that I had the courage to do, because had I not done that, fast forward to losing my daughter, if I had let my identity remain enmeshed with I am, my sense of self is that I am their mother, then what happens when you are left without one of your children? Grief is hard enough. And the reality is, in the aftermath of losing Riley, I will forever be her mum. That won't change. The way that I fulfill that role changes, because I will have to navigate milestones and anniversaries and events in a way that is very aware of the absence of a part of me that was, let's be real, supposed to be here across the lifespan. I believe that when we create life as women, we give up a piece of our soul in order for them to exist. And I believe that we do so willingly, because even though we give it up and give it to them, we're not supposed to live without it. We're still supposed to be able to live out this life with the awareness that that piece of my soul is still here and exists. And so that's kind of the trade-off for giving life. And because no parent is supposed to outlive their child, it's kind of a fair trade. When you're left in this existence without your child, and therefore a piece of your soul is missing, there is a forever ache that never goes away. So of course I don't stop being her mum because she's not here. If anything, I'm more aware in the deeper parts of my soul of the privilege that it is to be her mum, the privilege that the time spent with her on this earth was. And so I'm grateful that I did do the work back then that I did, to be able to work on really clarifying my identity and sense of self. And I don't mean to sound like it was just done, because let's be real, the work, whatever the work is, it's lifelong. We're always just journeying through this life and uncharted territory more often than not, in a way that with no guidebook and no rules. And if we're not careful, we're going to do so on someone else's agenda, living in martyrdom to other people's existence and facilitating their best life potentially. And all I'm talking about is having a healthy sense of self that allows you the opportunity to really look at your life and the roles that you're fulfilling and the hats that you wear, and work out which parts of that have I let become enmeshed in my sense of self and self-identity and in turn self-worth, and having the courage to look at really going, well, that's not. I'm going to let that be one of my roles or the hats that I wear, and I'm going to explore that when I take all of that away, what's left? And am I happy with what's left? And the reality is, if you are somebody like me who, like a lot of us, has let any part of your roles define who you are or your sense of self, then you're probably going to have some work to do to get from there to main character. So I'd done the work at the time. I'd done the work to kind of go on this exploration of self, and I'm grateful for that. But it made me realize that if we're not careful and we let ourselves be defined as the role of parents, for instance, mum or dad, if we let that become our identity, then it lends itself to becoming another statistic of empty nest syndrome, because we don't know who we are when they've left. We've let ourselves be defined, like I had at the time, as the parent of small children. And I think the thing is, we see these overbearing mother-in-law or father-in-law who don't know how to let go. They don't know how to just trust their child to navigate life, knowing that if they need me, they know they can come back, and that I'm here to support them. And it just creates unrest. And then they're so worried about enmeshing themselves in the lives of their now adult children that they're not seizing the opportunity that era of life presents to be able to reclaim your freedom. What better time to be reclaiming our main character energy if you've never done it before than when you're no longer responsible for all of the needs of these children that you've raised until then. You have all this extra time on your hands to go exploring on what do I like, what do I not like, what do I want to do with my life. And that main character energy is very much about stepping into the power of that. But it happens not just when children grow up and want to leave home, but what if a career ends? What if a relationship changes or the dissolution of a relationship? You see it all the time. People have let themselves be defined by their role as husband, wife, partner. And then when that relationship ends in divorce or separation, they have this complete loss of identity because I don't know who I am anymore. If I've let myself just be defined as, and in doing so lived out a lot of my existence in martyrdom to my partner or my children or my family's existence, and of course I don't know who I am without that martyrdom role. And if you've built your entire sense of self around what you do, not who you are, then those changes don't just cause grief, they create an identity collapse. And so fast forward after losing Riley, and every time I tried to return to nursing, it was just anxiety inducing. And so I had this career that I had been in for over 20 years that I thought I was going to do across the lifespan. There was no part of me that had any intention of quitting before I was super old because it was something I could have done across the lifespan. And I had to go through this whole grieving process of letting go of, and that's valid. It's because it was something that I wanted and intended to do across the lifespan and that I only saw ending because of my trauma. And had it not been for the trauma associated with her death, I would have continued to do it. So, of course, stuff came to the surface as far as grieving this thing that I thought was going to be a much longer season of my life. But in grieving it, I realized how much of my identity I had let seep into being defined as a nurse or as a nurse and a midwife. That's who I thought I was. And so if you take that away from me, what does that leave? It's just interesting to see how even when I was consciously trying to be aware throughout my life, I had done it. I had let that become a part of my identity. And that's when martyrdom sneaks in, because when we stop existing for ourselves and only exist for others, we confuse being selfless with actually being invisible. And we think we're on this noble path of acting selflessly, but really it's self-abandonment. And we wear this badge of always putting others first like it's a virtue, but really it's the slow erasing of who I am as a person so that I can just seep into this mold that you want me to fit so that I'm ultimately serving your purpose. And I don't mean people want it consciously. And to be honest, I don't think that there's many people that actually go about desiring this from us. I think it facilitates the capacity to be consumed by our roles and in doing so perceive that to be our identity and at a much greater cost to us than we might be realizing. And so the way we can reclaim our main character energy is by remembering that our essence, who we truly are, exists beyond the roles that we play in life or the hats that we wear. Yes, we're all mothers, fathers, caregivers, professionals, partners, creators, whatever we are, but underneath all of that, we're souls on a journey, and our roles may shift or fade and expand or end like mine, but our beingness is what remains. And to truly live, I believe that there's 3 things that we need to do. And the first one is anchor ourselves to identity, not role. So it really starts by getting courageous enough to ask yourself, who am I when no one needs anything from me? If all my roles were stripped away and I wasn't a parent, a partner, a nurse, an achiever, who would be left? What would remain? And this inner knowing becomes your anchor. When you can get to the place where you're like, okay, all that's gone, what's left? And don't get me wrong, if you're like me back years ago, going, there's actually nothing left. Like, I don't know who I am and I don't even know where to start. then the beauty is the world's your oyster. You could let that be defined in any way you wanted. You get to build that character out. And if you start thinking of it as main character energy, we're talking about a feature film, like on the big screen. You're watching the best movie ever and you're thinking about that main character. If you got to be it and the stage is your life, how do you want that to feel? Who do you want to be? How do you want to show up? And you can build it from the ground up. But essentially, if you strip back all the layers and what's left there is something that you are discontent with, then we get to take accountability for that and really define the edges of that for ourselves. So when we live from that place, though, let's say we've stripped everything back and we work out what's left and who's there and that's my identity, and we live from that place and stop clutching at roles as if our worth depends on it, then we get to begin expressing through them instead. So I get to express myself through my roles, and it's so beautiful to actually be stepping into this power because of course I didn't need to stay attached to my nursing. When I finally made the call, this thing that I had been dreading because I was still hanging on for dear life to the last little thread that tied itself to the sense of identity that I had in defining myself as a nurse, when I let go, and the way I would describe it is, so often in life when one door is closing, we get stuck in this dark corner, pulling for dear life, trying to pull that door back open because it was meant to last longer or be more or whatever it was, whether it's a career path, a relationship that's ending, whatever it is. We cling for dear life because we think, our ego thinks that that thing was meant to be better or last longer. And if we just turned around, here's the universe behind us going, darling, get out of the dark corner. Look at all this beautiful color and light that I'm offering you, all these doors that are opening and you're in the dark corner looking back. What are you doing? And so I made the call, I finally did, that I was dreading, and said I'm not going to re-register as a nurse, I'm not going to continue. And I've never felt so much peace as what came over me after the phone call. And I tell you what, when I finally did it, everything in my life started flowing. I was here saying I want to do this, and this, I want to be this in life, but meanwhile I'm putting energy into something that doesn't actually serve or facilitate any of the things that I was listing. And when probably the first powerful step I took into, and I didn't realize I was doing it, into my main character energy was that call. By cutting off what no longer served me, what had fulfilled its season in my life and needed to end, I was able to turn around in life and just really step into the flow of everything I said I wanted to facilitate. And so it made it so much easier to start going, oh my God, this is what main character energy feels like. And I'm manifesting like a motherfucker. So if you haven't listened to that episode, go and find Manifesting Like a Mofo, because I started doing that at the end of last year and this all happened in amongst it. But again, just finding myself in flow, walking through pretty much every door that opens, because I found that was another lesson. Everything that you desire is on the other side of a door you're yet to walk through in life. And I truly believe that. So I started saying yes to life. I started finding myself in flow. I started finding it easier to really anchor myself to this sense of self and identity that I realized I get to manifest. I get to define the edges of that. I'm not restricted by or defined by my origins or determined by where I came from by any means. And I don't even have to be the same version of myself today that I was yesterday. It's a really, really rewarding place to be and to start from. And so that's number one. So number two is live by your core values, not your circumstantial titles. So main character energy doesn't mean always being the loudest or the boldest or the most spotlighted person in the room. It means knowing what you stand for and then living according to your truth, your integrity, your purpose, even when no one else is watching. And I think that that's the thing. Who are we when nobody needs anything from us, and who are we when nobody's watching? Because if we really do realize that, like I said, main character energy doesn't mean being arrogant. It doesn't mean being loud and obnoxious. It can be very subtle in its authority and its power, and it's just a fucking vibe, because you know that you are the lead in this film and the cameras and the lights are always on. And it's a game changer, because if you think about it in that context and the cameras are always on you, how do you want to be perceived? How do you want to show up in this life? How do you want to experience it? You start really showing up for yourself as if it's always on, because it is. And the way that we show up and the way that we act, not just when people are around and looking, especially when no one's around, really does impact and determine so much more of what happens tomorrow and down the track in our life than we give weight to. So if we see every bit of now as an investment in the future, and I get to dictate and control maybe not the environmental factors always of now, but definitely how I respond and react to that and how I show up and the vibe that I bring, and then step into that power. Of course, I'm creating an incredible fucking feature film out of my life, because I'm not letting life happen to me. It's happening for me. And so it's stepping into that power, because when you choose your values as your compass, your path feels aligned. Even if it's unconventional or misunderstood by others, you become less reactive to what's happening around you and more responsive to what's calling within you. And that's the thing that I think when you really realize that's what you're doing, it makes your life exciting. To know I don't need other people's validation. I don't need to validate my sense of self or my self-worth via the approval of others. I am showing up in my main character energy in a way that feels 100% aligned to what's calling within me, rather than responsive and reactive to the external factors of my life that ultimately I can't control. And then number 3 is keep evolving and do it on purpose. Think of it like this. Our roles can be these really beautiful containers for growth, but the danger comes when we stay in them past their expiry date. And it definitely wasn't going to serve me to stay in the role of nurse, for instance, in the hospital setting, when it was anxiety inducing in the aftermath of trauma and trying to live and grieve simultaneously. So staying in that would have definitely stifled my growth. It would have filled me with resentment and burnout and stopped me from showing up in main character energy, because again, I'm living a subservient version of my life in martyrdom to who though? Like who? I don't need to be in that role anymore, especially if it doesn't serve me. Its expiry date has definitely been reached, and I realize the power of acknowledging that with the beauty and the peace and the flow that came into my life when I had the courage to call it. But main character energy means being willing to evolve. It's being willing to get uncomfortable, even if and especially when the evolution is uncomfortable. It's having the courage to release the roles that no longer fit and try new ones on, even when they feel unfamiliar or it feels really vulnerable at first. And it did. It's been an incredibly uncomfortable at times, the ride. But I think of the discomfort like what I imagine the caterpillar feels like moments before it's going to break through the cocoon. And it's like, I just can't take it anymore. I cannot take this discomfort. But then what actually ends up happening is it breaks free and realizes I'm not a caterpillar anymore. I'm actually a beautiful butterfly, and I've got these wings and I can fly. And I think if we actually evaluate the discomfort in our life, if it's associated with doing the work, with the really confronting and uncomfortable aspects of our growth, then it's 100% worth leaning into, because you might not be able to see what's on the other side of the cocoon, but I promise you, if it's intentional and it's aimed at growth, then 100% the other side of the cocoon is going to be rewarding. Stepping into your power can't be anything but rewarding. And it's that main character energy and bringing that. It's not performative. It's a quiet, steady reclaiming of your truth. It's finding your voice and your vision and understanding that I can grieve what was, whatever that is in your life, but I can also do it while I'm celebrating what is, and at the same time as leaning boldly into what could be, and knowing that at the center of all of it, I'm whole, I'm worthy, and I'm already enough. And I think, like, if that's something that, as I say that doesn't resonate with you to the core, then I would encourage you to go and listen to the other episode that I have about becoming the one. Because honestly, I would focus on becoming the one and incorporate manifesting as you step into that main character energy and treat your life like it's an A-list feature film on the big screen and you're the lead actor, and everybody is so fortunate to be in your film and you are not the extra in somebody else's film. But I want to talk about too how we lose our main character energy to grief and its martyrdom trap, because let's be real, something grief has shown me is we're all just struggling. Everybody's just going through it. They're going through something, and your grief may look nothing like mine. It may not be associated with death. It may be the loss of a career or the dissolution of a relationship, or you're navigating a breakup or heading towards divorce. There's all these things that happen in life that we thought was going to be a bigger or longer version or season, and we find ourselves navigating what should be or is the end of it, and it's grief. It's grief associated, and grief is powerful. It just strips you bare. It rearranges your whole life and identity in a single moment sometimes. So if you're not careful, it can also quietly steal your main character energy and this sense of agency and purpose and personal significance that we're meant to carry throughout our own life. And in the wake of deep loss, many of us just unintentionally slip into martyrdom. We stop living and start just simply enduring. And I know what that feels like. We shape our days around the pain rather than the possibility, and our choices become small and our voices quiet. Our needs become secondary. Grief is valid. That's one thing I always want to make very clear. I don't want you putting your grief loss next to mine by comparison and somehow lowering it because you think it's not as significant. Grief is grief, and grief is a bitch, and it will steal your joy and your agency if you're not careful and lead you down a path that really doesn't do anything but steal the opportunity for you to live the fuck out of your life. And that needn't be the case is the point that I'm trying to make. And while that kind of self-sacrifice, like I said, might feel noble, you're not supposed to lose yourself in the aftermath of loss. Whatever the loss is, it shouldn't mean that you lose your sense of self. But martyrdom tricks us into thinking that fully living again makes us selfish somehow. That reclaiming my joy and my purpose or my dream means that I've somehow moved on from whatever it is that I'm grieving. And it's crazy how manipulative and subtle and quiet that sneaks in and can just really steal your main character energy. But main character energy says, my life still matters. My story is still unfolding, and my desires and my dreams and my voice are still worthy of being heard. And that I'm going to let grief be a chapter and not the whole story. A chapter that may permeate the rest of the story, but it doesn't need to dictate it, and that's what's important. And as we reclaim our power and that energy, it doesn't mean denying my pain. It means refusing to make pain my permanent identity. It means showing up, whether that's messy, courageous, and imperfect, to really own my life, and not in a supporting role, but as the lead. And that's what I want for everybody, is to realize, like I said, it's not about being loud and obnoxious or arrogant or the happiest and, most healed person in the room. It's about choosing to live intentionally, even when my heart aches. It's about giving myself permission to matter again, because healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering who I am, and then writing the rest of my life with power and gratitude and grace. Because main character energy isn't just about being the lead role. And I want to make that very clear. It's about being the producer and the director of your own story. Because here's the truth, you can't fully embody main character energy if you're still handing the pen to other people. If you're still waiting for someone else to validate your script, if you're stuck on a stage someone else built, if you're performing a version of your life that doesn't even feel like it's yours anymore. And the difference between the parts that you get to reclaim is that the lead actually lives the story, but the producer sets the vision, and the director calls the shots, and the writer decides what makes it into the next scene or what gets cut. And if you're only focused on acting out the part that people expect of you, then you're going to end up with a well-rehearsed life that looks good on paper but feels completely out of alignment. This is going to lead to resentment and burnout, and is anything but main character energy. In its truest form, it's taking full creative ownership over your life, which is actually really exciting to think about doing. What it actually looks like is, as a producer, you get to choose where your energy goes. You budget your time, your emotional capacity, where, how, and with whom you say yes or no to, and do so with intention. Stop giving the spotlight to people who haven't earned it and start funding the parts of your life that truly matter. And as the director, you get to set the tone. You decide what stays in frame and what needs to be cut. And you choose the energy, the pace, the angles. You decide what scenes get a close-up and what moments don't even make the final edit. And then think of the last bit being, as the writer, you reframe the narrative. You get to really take your power back, because it's realizing that I may not control all of the environmental factors of what happens in and around my life, but I definitely get to control how I respond and react to those things. And that's the role of the writer of your life. The pen is in your hand. By doing so, you don't erase the pain, but you do get to choose what meaning it carries. And it's been a game changer thinking about my life like that in the aftermath of trauma and loss, and being able to write plot twists with purpose, not pity, and tell my story in a way that honors where I've been, but also doesn't limit where I'm going. And it's so exciting, because this is my story. This is your story. Your one wild, precious life. And main character energy means being unapologetic about living on purpose, not by default. And that's what I would encourage you to do. You don't owe anyone a performance of the past version of you. You owe yourself the kind of creative direction that lets you feel like life belongs to you again. So don't just play the part, let's run the show. And that is what I wanted to discuss about bringing that main character energy to your life. It's the opportunity to do so starts now. So I would encourage you to, like I said, start stripping those layers back and evaluate what's there. And if it's a reasonably blank slate, then the world is your oyster, because that's the beauty about the lifelong work that is us in this journey. If we really take ownership over it, we get to just define and then redefine ourselves in the wake of every challenge that life presents. Because if we see everything in life as a lesson or a gift, sometimes both, then there's always room for growth. There's always room for improvement. There's always an ability to reflect and go, you know what, I'm going to make today and tomorrow a better version of myself than was yesterday. I'm not the person I was yesterday. I'm not the person that I will be tomorrow, but I'm definitely 100% invested in bringing main character energy to the feature film that is my life, and I hope you do the same for your sakes. Something I want to be clear about before I end it is that you can be a devoted parent and still be your own person. You can grieve with depth and still live out loud. You can be of service to others without abandoning yourself, and that's important, because sometimes we think it's one or the other, and that's actually what resilience looks like. It's a capacity to know that I can do both. It's what main character energy is all about, and that's what I want and hope for everyone that's listening. So in closing, the reminder that I want to leave you with today is this: you are not what you do. You are not just who you care for. You are not just who you were before the world broke your heart. You are the main character. You get to grieve and still grow. You get to remember and still get to reclaim. And you get to love others deeply and still choose yourself boldly, because this is your life. This is your scene. This is your feature film. So thank you for listening to this episode of Why Mindset Matters about main character energy. If this resonated, I'd really love for you to share it with someone you believe could benefit from hearing it today. You can follow me on Instagram at @EslanAloa. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I look forward to sharing everything that is Why Mindset Matters with you in the coming episodes. Take care of yourself.